However, it didn't take long for the man's face to stiffen, because Yang Yi was looking at him, and Yang Yi seemed like he was looking at an idiot. Nether Maiden was stunned as well, because Yang Yi was completely fine. She heaved a sigh of relief in her heart, glanced at Yang Yi, and then turned around and shot at Xianxia and the others who were in pursuit of her. The pig-riding young woman glanced at Yang Yi as well, and she muttered, "That fellow is really mysterious." As soon as she finished speaking, she paid no further attention to Yang Yi and swung her saber at Lien Suyao's group. What was going on? How was Yang Yi completely fine? Yang Yi was naturally fine. At the moment the soul beast had entered his body, it had been instantly shattered by the primordial pagoda, and then it was transformed into strands of energy that entered Xiao Qi's body in the second level. Once the energy entered her body, while she still hadn't woken up, there had been some changes in her body and countenance. How is he still fine? The black-robed man's mind was filled with questions. Suddenly, his eyes opened wide. However, could this be possible? The link between me and my soul beast is gone. How could this be possible? How could this be possible? As he finished speaking, he was practically howling. Yang Yi withdrew some divine crystals, swallowed them, and then spoke indifferently. "Your soul beast said that my bones are unique, and I'm a peerless genius, so it decided to stay with me." "Nonsense!" the black-robed man roared with fury. "I nurtured it with my soul for over 3,600 years. It's one with my mind and body, and it acknowledged me as its master a long time ago. How could it possibly abandon me and side with you? 3,600 years. Yang Ye's eyelids twitched. That was long. Actually, he wasn't actually gambling when he allowed it to enter his body, because he was very confident in the primordial pagoda. Not to mention the soul beast, even Xianxia probably couldn't escape once he entered the primordial pagoda. After all, it had forcefully sealed Xianxia while it was still injured, and Xianxia was extremely afraid of it. So, if the soul beast entered his body, it was actually not different than giving its life away. Yang Yi. Meanwhile, the black-robed man suddenly howled with fury. "What have you done to it?" Yang Yi withdrew more divine crystals, swallowed them, and then spoke indifferently. "Nothing much. At the very least, it's fine for now. However, I don't know what'll happen to it later." The black-robed man heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Yang Yi. "It's fine so long as my soul beast is still alive." He was from the large world. He'd found that soul beast by chance while he was young, and it was his final trump card. If he lost the soul beast, then his strength would plummet. Moreover, his worth would plummet as well. If that happened, his status in his sect would plummet as well. So long as it wasn't annihilated, he still had a chance. The black-robed man remained silent for a moment, and then he said, "Yang Yi, release it and I'll spare your life." "Spare me?" A wisp of ridicule curled up on the corners of Yang Ye's mouth. "Do you think I'm a fool? Or are you a fool?" The black-robed man spoke in a low voice. "What do you want?" Yang Yi replied, "Actually, it's very simple. I just want you to tell me a few things, and then I'll return it to you." He would naturally not say something like he would let the black-robed man leave. After all, that wasn't realistic at all. The black-robed man had come from the large world, and it was impossible that the black-robed man would leave without accomplishing his objective. Moreover, even if the black-robed man agreed to leave, Yang Yi wouldn't believe him. So it was better to just buy time. The black-robed man spoke in a slightly questioning tone. "That simple?" "Indeed." Yang Yi continued. "So long as you tell me what I want to know, I'll give it back to you. I will absolutely not go back on my word." "All right, go on." The black-robed man quickly agreed. Yang Yi was a sword cultivator, and he was a formidable sword cultivator as well. Such people usually disdained to lie. Since Yang Yi had agreed to return it to him, Yang Yi should do so. Of course, the main reason he'd agreed was that he had no other choice. Yang Yi nodded and said, "Besides the permits, are there other ways to enter the large world?" He was definitely going there because Zir and Snowy were in the Divine Phoenix clan. However, he didn't know how to get up there. The permit? If he wanted a permit, then he would have to kill Nether Maiden and the others. Not to mention that he didn't have the strength to accomplish that. He wouldn't do it even if he had the strength. As for his own head, that was even more impossible. The black-robed man spoke in a low voice. "You want to enter the large world?" Xianxia nodded. "I really want to. So, tell me if there are other ways to get there." The black-robed man remained silent for a long while before he spoke. "There's a spatial passageway at the end of the sky. It leads to the large world. However, there are experts guarding it. You have 3 choices. The first is to use a permit. The second is to make the power you represent meet the required standards. In other words, you have to possess control over 100+ worlds and 10 medium worlds. Only then will the large world send you an invitation to enter the large world. As for the third choice..." He paused for a moment at this point, and then he continued, "The third choice is to fight your way up there." Fight his way up there. Xianxia frowned. The first option was definitely impossible. He had no permits. As for the second, if he was given the time, he had the chance to meet the requirements. However, taking control over 100+ worlds would definitely take a huge amount of time. He couldn't wait until then. The third. He could only choose the third. The black-robed man seemed to know what Xianxia was thinking and said, "You intend to fight your way up there?" Xianxia glanced at him and replied, "That's what I intend to do for now." "You're overestimating your ability." The black-robed man continued, "From time immemorial, less than 5 have ever fought their way up into the large world. In the last tens of thousands of years, only 2 have succeeded in doing so." Xianxia was quite curious. "Which 2?" The black-robed man replied, "Someone called Wuxia. He broke through the heaven path with just his sword. Once he arrived at the large world, he established the Sword God's Pavilion. All those years ago, he was reputed to be the #1 sword cultivator from the lower dimensions in the last tens of thousands of years. However, it didn't take long for that title to be disputed." Xianxia asked, "Why?" The black-robed man answered, "Because someone else broke through the heaven path not long after him. Moreover, that person was a sword cultivator too, and he'd used a shorter amount of time to get through the heaven path." Xianxia asked, "His name was the Unfettered One, right?" The black-robed man was surprised. "How did you know?" "It really was that fellow. The Unfettered One." That name was naturally not unfamiliar to Xianxia. Since his time on Profounder Continent, Xianxia had constantly heard about the Unfettered One. He was very curious about the Unfettered One, because there was a faint link between him and the Unfettered One. After all, the Sword Sect had been established by the Unfettered One, and the Sword Sect's current master was his wife. Moreover, he'd been part of the Sword Sect in the past. Meanwhile, the black-robed man continued. After Wuxia arrived at the large world, the first thing he did was visit all the sword cultivators there. Even though he paid them a visit, he was actually challenging them. However, he would send his greetings before he challenged every sword cultivator. So, even if they lost, they wouldn't feel any ill intent towards him. Conversely, many of them even became friends with him. The black-robed man fell silent at this point, and he only continued a while later. Once that fellow called the Unfettered One arrived at the large world, the first thing he did was around the same as Wuxia, but the method he used was very different. He'd immediately gone to challenge all the renowned sword-cultivating sects in the large world, and every time he defeated them, he would even say that they weren't strong enough. So, his reputation in the large world wasn't very good. However, it didn't take long for him to vanish. He vanished. Xianxia asked, "Where did he go?" The black-robed man shook his head. "I don't know. In any case, no one saw him challenging anyone else after that. Perhaps it was because he'd fought all of them." Xianxia was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, the black-robed man said, "I've told you what I know. Now, it's your turn to fulfill your promise." "My promise?" Xianxia was stunned and asked, "What promise?" The black-robed man's voice became cold. "Are you planning on going back on your word? You're talking about your soul beast." Xianxia nodded and said, "I would never go back on my word. Of course. Am I a person like that? I told you that you have to answer my questions before I return it to you. But I'm not done." The black-robed man said. Then hurry up. Yang Yi thought for a moment and said, There's a question that has been troubling me for a very long time, and I've never gotten an answer to it. You're from the large world, so you possess extensive knowledge and will definitely be able to answer it for me. Right, the question is how many stars are there in our universe? This question is very simple for you, right? The black-clothed man felt speechless. You don't know? Yang Yi continued. If you don't know, then I can't return the soul beast to you. See, you haven't fulfilled my request, so I'm not going back on my word. How utterly shameless! The black-robed man roared with fury. At this moment, he naturally understood that Yang Yi had been buying time from the very beginning. So he didn't waste his breath again and was about to attack. Bang! Suddenly, a loud explosion resounded from below, and then a strand of resentment suddenly shot up into the sky. As soon as the resentment appeared, the space in an area of almost 5,000 kilometers instantly started to ripple violently as if an earthquake was rumbling through it. At the same time, the entire sky was suddenly covered in dark clouds. Everyone here was shocked, including Yang Yi. All of them looked down. The area below was filled by boundless resentment, baleful energy, and slaughter intent that surged up incessantly towards the sky. Their minds were almost corrupted by it. They hurriedly moved backwards and circulated their profound energy to protect themselves. Get down here now. All of you. Hurry. Boundary Maiden's anxious voice came from below. Her voice wasn't just anxious, it was even trembling slightly. What are they doing? Yang Yi had a puzzled expression on his face. Meanwhile, Nether Maiden and the pig-riding young woman didn't hesitate to shoot down. Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Suddenly, Nether Maiden appeared by Yang Ye's side. At this moment, she had an extremely solemn expression on her face, and her countenance was even slightly pale. She's very important to us. Extremely important. Even if we die, we can't allow anything to happen to her. So we have to head down there. As for here, I have to entrust it to you. Please. As soon as she finished speaking, Nether Maiden flashed down there. Yang Yi felt speechless. Suddenly, numerous formidable auras appeared in the sky above the radiant dimension, and these auras were approaching rapidly. More were here. Yang Yi turned to look at the black-robed man, Lian Suyao, and the others. He gulped and said, While we know each other well, but you can't throw me in such a pit of fire. The black-robed man, the three Musanuans, Jin Xiu, and Lian Suyao's group were standing before Yang Yi. 9 people. 9 extraordinary geniuses who were comparable to semi-deities. Moreover, more had arrived. It didn't take long for 3 middle-aged men to appear in the sky above the radiant dimension. They weren't voiders but semi-deities, true semi-deities. Moreover, based on their auras, all of them weren't weak semi-deities but true semi-deities that had relied on their own hard work to attain their realms of cultivation. 12. Yang Yi wanted to flee now. He knew that Nether Maiden and the others had definitely not thrown him into such a situation on purpose. That face down below was probably really important to them, and it was so important that they were willing to sacrifice themselves. If he wasn't wrong, that face was the reason they gathered in the radiant dimension and stayed here for so long. What exactly was the face? He naturally didn't have the time to think about that right now. He had to consider how he would deal with these 12 people in front of him. He'd immediately thought of Xianxia. Unfortunately, Xianxia didn't reply no matter how he called out to Xianxia. Obviously, he couldn't place any hopes on Xianxia. Yang Yi remained silent for a moment before he looked up at the black-robed man and the others here. At this moment, all of them were looking at him too. Yang Yi pondered deeply for a short moment, and then he said, I think we can sit down and discuss this. Talking about the problem is the most efficient method. What do all of you think? I think that the fist is the most efficient method to deal with things. The black-robed man spoke indifferently. Yang Yi, I don't want to waste my breath on you. Hand over my soul beast and I'll let you die with dignity. Otherwise, death would be what you wish for the most. Yang Yi glanced at them and said, A person will explode with unimaginable strength when pushed into a corner. So, it's best if you don't push me into a corner. Otherwise, I'll fight desperately against all of you. What a joke! The black-robed man ridiculed. What a huge joke! Yang Yi, you're still so full of nonsense when you're about to die. Don't you think it's really laughable? The black-robed man didn't waste his breath again. He just waved his right hand and said, his head is worth 10 permits. We can kill him first, and then discuss how to share the permits. All of them exchanged glances and nodded. They weren't fools, so they wouldn't discuss how to share the permits before they killed Yang Yi. They didn't speak another word and just charged at Yang Yi. The black-robed man charged at the front of the group. He knew that his soul beast was in Yang Yi's possession, and he might be able to get it back if he killed Yang Yi. As they charged at Yang Yi, all 12 of them released their auras in Yang Yi's direction, causing Yang Yi to feel like his heart had stopped. A wisp of ferocity flashed through Yang Yi's eyes as he watched the 12 of them charge at him. Bang! Suddenly, a beam of crystal blue light shot down from the starry sky, and it instantly entered Yang Yi's body from the top of his head. Once it entered his body, crystal blue scales instantly covered him. At the same time, stellar energy flowed incessantly through him. The stellar energy within him surged in waves. Yang Yi's eyes gradually turned blood red as he gazed at the black-robed man and the others. The ancient sheath appeared in his left grasp, and the sword in his right grasp was exchanged for the sword precursor. A terrifying aura surged out from Yang Yi once his sword was sheathed. Lien Suyao and the others' expressions changed drastically because they knew that Yang Yi was about to draw his sword. Just thinking about that attack made a chill run down their spines. Right when they were about to turn around and retreat, the black-robed man suddenly shouted with fury, "Don't retreat. He's almost completely exhausted. I'll stop this attack of his. So come with me. Kill." OM. A sword howl suddenly interrupted him, and then a beam of sword energy flashed out from Yang Yi's ancient sheath. It was so swift that it couldn't even be seen properly. The black-robed man's pupils had instantly constricted to the size of needles when the sword energy appeared, and then his hairs stood on end. He was horrified. At the moment he saw the attack, the black-robed man was in a terrible state. He knew that he'd severely underestimated Yang Yi's attack. As far as he'd been concerned, no matter how strong an emperor was, how strong could an emperor be? Could someone like that defy the heavens? So he hadn't really taken Yang Yi's attack seriously. However, when he saw it, he knew that it could really defy the heavens. Unfortunately, it was too late. Hiss! The black-robed man's figure was split into two in midair. Because the sword energy was too swift, it was very abrupt and shocking. Because the others hadn't been able to catch sight of the sword energy. The most shocking part was that the halves of the black-robed man's body were still charging at Yang Yi. That was naturally caused by momentum. The black-robed man had been too swift, and Yang Yi's attack was swift too. So, his body continued forward even after he died. Lien Suyao and the others turned ghastly pale when they saw the black-robed man's figure being slashed into two. They were horrified to the extreme. Suddenly, one of the semi-deities amongst the three who just arrived spoke ferociously. "There's no need to fear him. That sword technique was so powerful, so it's impossible to execute numerous times. Let's attack him together. 10 permits are right in front." OM. Another sword howl resounded. And then that semi-deity's voice stopped abruptly. His figure stiffened on the spot while his eyes opened wide. His eyes were filled with disbelief. In an instant, Lien Suyao and the others watched as his body split open from the center as well. Blood and internal organs sprayed throughout the air. It was an absolutely bloody scene. All of them were stunned on the spot, and their eyes were filled with fear and terror. Meanwhile, Yang Yi sheathed his sword once more. OM. The ancient sheath trembled violently when his sword was sheathed within it, and then a ray of dazzling light erupted from it. At the same time, the space around Yang Yi seemed to be unable to endure the sword howl and shook violently. Lien Suyao and the others were horrified by this sight. All of them shot backwards and instantly moved around 10 kilometers back. Yang Yi's gaze descended onto Jin Xiu, who was comparatively closer to him. Jin Xiu's expression changed drastically, and he transformed into a ray of golden light that moved far away. Moreover, he hurriedly withdrew his defensive treasures and formed almost 1,000 golden profound energy barriers around himself. When he saw Xianxia retreat, Yang Yi gazed at the three Musanuans. Their expressions immediately changed, and they hurriedly retreated far away just like Xianxia. Once the three Musanuans retreated, Yang Yi gazed at Lian Suyao. Lian Suyao didn't retreat and just met Yang Ye's gaze. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly, and he placed his right hand on the hilt of his sword. Xianxia and the others instantly became extremely vigilant from the sight of this, but Lian Suyao seemed quite calm this time. Right when Yang Yi was about to draw his sword, Lian Suyao suddenly said, "I don't want those permits anymore." Everyone including Yang Yi was stunned. "She doesn't want it?" Lian Suyao shot a deep and long glance at Yang Yi, and then she didn't speak another word before vanishing into the sky. "I don't want it anymore as well." The petite woman who rode the wolf took a deep and long glance at Yang Yi as well, and then she turned around and vanished into the sky. "I don't want it anymore as well." In next to no time, all the others who'd come here with Hua Tianyuan had turned around and left the radiant dimension. They were truly afraid. Perhaps the permit could change their destiny, but if they lost their lives, then even 1,000 permits would be useless. At this point in the battle, every single time they felt that it would be Yang Ye's last attack or that he was almost exhausted, Yang Yi would give them a great pleasant surprise. They truly didn't want to continue experiencing those pleasant surprises anymore. They couldn't take it anymore. So, Lian Suyao and the others had decisively chosen to leave. The permits were good, but their lives were more important. Once Lian Suyao and the others left, only Xianxia, the three Musanuans, and the other two semi-deities remained here. There were only two choices before them. The first was to continue and annihilate Yang Yi, and the second was to do as Lian Suyao and the others had done. It was to decisively decide to leave. Even though they would lose their chance to obtain the permits, their survival would be guaranteed. However, they were truly unwilling to just leave like that. But while they refused to leave, they didn't dare to attack as well. Suddenly, Yang Yi gazed at Xianxia and the others, and their expressions changed slightly while vigilance and fear filled their eyes. Even though Yang Yi was just an emperor and was a realm of cultivation below them, none of them dared to underestimate him. Yang Yi looked straight at them and said, "Is it really worth it to use your lives to exhaust me, and then allow those who arrive later to reap the benefits? If you think it's worth it, then what are you waiting for? Come at me right now." As he finished speaking, a ferocious expression appeared on Yang Ye's face while a trace of madness appeared in his eyes. Xianxia gazed at Yang Yi for a long time, and then he said, "I don't want the permits anymore as well." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure vanished into the sky. Since he didn't dare to attack, he had no choice but to retreat. Those who dare not attack yet refuse to retreat and constantly act hesitantly will usually suffer horrible fates. So, Xianxia had decisively chosen to retreat. Those who couldn't resist temptation usually suffered terrible consequences. Once Xianxia left, only the three Musanuans and those two semi-deities remained. The three Musanuans exchanged glances and nodded. They were just about to leave when an old man in linen robes suddenly appeared here. "My alliance should have stopped at nothing to kill you all those years ago. But it isn't too late now." As soon as he finished speaking, the old man in linen robes stretched out his hand and tapped a finger in Yang Ye's direction. Bang! Yang Yi was instantly blasted around 10 kilometers away. A deity. The three Musanuans and the two semi-deities who'd been about to leave had immediately stopped when they witnessed this scene. After retreating a few thousands of kilometers, Yang Yi finally stopped his figure. A mark created by a finger had been left behind on his chest. Even though the scales there had completely warped, they hadn't been broken open. Moreover, the mark swiftly vanished as his stellar energy repaired the scales there. Meanwhile, Yang Ye's body had merely been shaken slightly and hadn't suffered any material harm. Actually, this wasn't just the benefits of the stellar ward technique. His own physical strength and defenses had played a huge role as well. If he was an ordinary person, he would have definitely been heavily injured by that attack, even if he had the stellar ward technique. The stellar ward technique was very formidable, and it could protect its user from most damage. However, it was impossible for it to protect its user from all damage. For example, that attack Yang Yi had just received from the old man at the deity realm. Most of the damage had been resisted by the stellar ward technique, but the remaining force was still extremely strong, and that was what had blasted Yang Yi so far away. If his body wasn't at the epic realm, then the remaining force might have shattered his body. It was like what had happened to the short man when he fought the pig-riding young woman. His weapon had resisted the force within her attack, but his body hadn't been able to resist the remaining force that came from the collision. What powerful defenses! The old man's eyes narrowed slightly, and he sized up Yang Yi. Stellar energy. You're actually able to utilize both profound energy and stellar energy. Truly inconceivable. Many people in Skyriver Stellar region had noticed the existence of stellar energy in the past, and some had thought of cultivating with both profound energy and stellar energy. However, that was utterly impossible because they were two different types of energy, and they would conflict with each other when within a single body. If one absorbed too much stellar energy, the two types of energy wouldn't just conflict with each other. It was very likely for one's body to be unable to endure it and explode apart. There were cases of cultivators in Skyriver Stellar region that had tried to master both types of energy and exploded in the end. So, he hadn't expected Yang Yi to actually possess both profound energy and stellar energy at the same time. Yang Yi moved his gaze away from his chest and gazed at the old man. That old man is probably the deity from the Alliance of Guardians. Yang Yi remembered that Fensongyan had said that the Alliance of Guardians had another deity guarding Skyriver Stellar region, so he felt that the old man should be that deity. A deity is here. Yang Yi couldn't help but feel slightly worried. He wasn't worried about himself. He was worried about Blind Maiden. Even though Blind Maiden hadn't shown herself, he knew that the pressure she was facing was definitely much greater than what he faced. If it was within her ability, she would have definitely not allowed a deity to come to the Radiant Dimension, because both he and the others from the Nether Pavilion would find it very strenuous to deal with a deity. Yet now a deity had arrived here. In other words, Blind Maiden might have her hands full. Xianxia's heart couldn't help but sink at the thought of that, because they would be finished if anything happened to Blind Maiden. Meanwhile, the old man said, "Yang Yi, that woman saved you that day. Now, let me see who'll save you today." As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward and tapped his finger in Yang Ye's direction. Space suddenly rippled like the surface of a lake. Yang Ye's expression changed. He took the sword precursor in both hands and swung it swiftly. Bang! A muffled explosion resounded, and then Yang Yi was blasted around 1 kilometer away. Once he stopped his figure, Yang Yi put the sword precursor away and exchanged it for Heaven's Gravestone. The sword precursor was clearly stronger than Heaven's Gravestone, but it had a huge problem. It exhausted too much profound energy. It consumed at least 5 times more profound energy than Heaven's Gravestone. So, unless he was executing the true form of Heavenrend, he would practically never utilize the sword precursor. The desire to kill in the old man's eyes grew even stronger when he saw Yang Yi overcome his attack. A true monstrous genius. Yang Yi was such a person. When it came to people like that, one should either avoid offending them or annihilate them if they've been offended. Otherwise, once they matured, the consequences would be absolutely impossible to endure. The old man pondered deeply for a moment and was about to attack. However, Yang Yi suddenly vanished on the spot, and he was in front of the old man when his figure appeared once more. At the same time, the tip of a sword stabbed towards the center of the old man's forehead. A wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of the old man's mouth. As far as he was concerned, even if Yang Yi was a true monstrous genius, an emperor like Yang Yi had no right to fight him. He was a deity and Yang Yi was just an emperor. The old man didn't waste his breath and just flipped his right palm slightly, and then he slapped it forward. Bang! A wave of terrifying energy surged out from the center of his palm. In just an instant, Yang Yi was blasted around 3 kilometers away. Right when the old man was about to attack again, Yang Ye's figure suddenly stopped flying backwards, and then the sword god's seal lit up on the center of his forehead. After that, Yang Yi vanished, and he was in front of the old man when his figure appeared once more. The three Musanuans and the two semi-deities' expressions changed drastically at the sight of this, and they shot backwards. Because they'd noticed a detail, and that detail was the blood-red sword in Yang Ye's ancient sheath had been changed while Yang Yi charged at the old man. Heaven's gravestone had been exchanged for the sword precursor. Meanwhile, Yang Yi arrived before the old man. A wisp of ridicule still remained on the corners of the old man's mouth. He was about to attack when his expression suddenly changed. Danger! Extreme danger! The old man was shocked. Why do I suddenly feel like I'm in extreme danger? Even though he was puzzled, he didn't act carelessly. A wave of terrifying aura surged out from him and slammed down upon Yang Yi. At the same time, he moved backwards. However, Yang Yi, who'd arrived before him, had swiftly drawn his sword and swung it. OM! At the moment this sword howl resounded, the old man's aura was instantly obliterated. At the same time, a huge expanse of space around them had collapsed in an instant. Besides that, large cracks were appearing through the expanse of space that was even farther away from them, and then numerous pillar-thick spatial rifts started spreading swiftly. It was an absolutely shocking sight. A few breaths of time later, the sky slowly returned to normal. At this moment, the old man who had been in front of Yang Yi was 30 kilometers away. The old man stared fixedly at Yang Yi. A short while passed before a wisp of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Crack! After that, a clear and resounding crack resounded. Mu Sanyuan and the others watched with astonishment as the old man's entire face suddenly cracked open. Moreover, the old man's entire body had cracked open as well. Blood was flowing from him like a fountain, and he was instantly drenched in blood. But he was still alive. Even though he was still alive, Mu Sanyuan and the others' hairs were standing on end. After all, the old man was a deity. A deity. However, he'd been reduced to such a state. Even though the old man wasn't dead, he was heavily injured. So, not to mention attacking, the old man probably wouldn't even dare to utilize his profound energy right now. Could be said that even a strong gale might be able to obliterate him. He was crippled. A deity had been crippled by a single swing of Yang Ye's sword. When they thought up to this point, Mu Sanyuan and the others couldn't help but shiver. Yang Yi hadn't chosen to follow up with another attack, because he was almost crippled as well. The stellar energy he'd absorbed into his body after executing the stellar ward technique had been completely exhausted. Actually, he'd exhausted all his stellar energy when he executed Heaven Rend twice just now. As for the Heaven Rend he'd just executed, he'd used profound energy to execute it because his profound energy had recovered a little. This was the benefit of being able to possess two types of energy. They could supplement each other. Since the very beginning, he'd executed Heaven Rend 5 times. 5 Heaven Rends. He was truly at the end of his strength. The reason he could still stand now was that the stellar ward technique was supporting him up. Once it vanished, he would be finished. Exhausted. Severely overexhausted. Kill him. Suddenly, the old man in linen robes shouted. However, a mouthful of blood instantly sprayed from his mouth once he finished speaking. Moreover, quite a bit of blood seeped out from his cracked face as well. Mu Sanyuan and the other two semi-deities exchanged glances, but they didn't choose to attack. Meanwhile, the old man spoke in a low voice. He's completely exhausted. Kill him quickly. It's the last chance you'll have. So long as you kill him, you'll be able to obtain 10 permits. So, what are you waiting for? He wanted to do it himself. However, he didn't even dare to move a muscle right now. Yang Ye's attack had shattered his entire body and internal organs. Could be said that even an ordinary cultivator could kill him right now. But he knew that Yang Yi was definitely in a similar state right now. Otherwise, Yang Yi would definitely not be standing there. Now, the only people who could fight were Mu Sanyuan and the others. So he'd entrusted his hopes to them. Mu Sanyuan and the others immediately gazed at Yang Yi when they heard the old man. Meanwhile, Yang Yi looked at them as well. His face was calm, and he remained silent. All he did was sheath the sword precursor. Mu Sanyuan and the others' expressions changed drastically the sight of that. What are you afraid of? Meanwhile, The old man howled with fury. He's just trying to scare all of you. Tell me, if he had the strength to fight, would he just look at me and not try to kill me? Would he? He wouldn't. But he didn't try to kill me because he's heavily injured as well. All of you can definitely kill him with absolute ease. Mu Sanyuan and the others exchanged glances, hesitated for a moment, and then they shot towards Yang Yi. Yang Ye's eyelids twitched at the sight of this. Suddenly, a woman appeared in front of Yang Yi. After that, she stretched out her right hand and waved it. Yang Yi watched with astonishment as a wave of energy rippled forward, and then Mu Sanyuan and the others were instantly obliterated. It only took an instant. After that, she turned around to look at Yang Yi. Yang Ye's eyes instantly opened wide when he saw her. You are... Yang Ye's eyes were filled with bewilderment, disbelief, and a trace of fear. Who was she? Yang Yi had met her before, of course. Moreover, it wasn't even very long ago, because she was actually that face which Nether Maiden and the others had been suppressing. A ghastly pale countenance, blood-red eyes, hair that emanated faint violet-colored baleful energy. Just a little while ago, she was emanating extremely terrifying resentment, and even his sword intent was barely able to defend him against it. Slaughter intent, resentment, and baleful energy. She seemed like the entire world owed her billions. After a moment of shock, it didn't take long for ferocity to cover Yang Ye's face. Nether Maiden and the others had been suppressing her. Yet now she'd taken human form. In other words, something happened to Nether Maiden and the others? Yang Yi spoke in a low voice. Where are they? At the same time, the sword god's seal lit up on his forehead. She glanced at his forehead, pondered deeply for an instant, and then suddenly stretched out her hand and tapped her finger against his forehead. In an instant, the sword god's seal fell silent. Yang Yi was shocked. Meanwhile, Nether Maiden appeared by his side, and then the pig-riding young woman, Boundary Maiden, Ice Maiden, Light Maiden, and Oblivion Maiden appeared in front of him. Yang Ye's eyes were filled with bewilderment. What? Meanwhile, Nether Maiden spoke. Remember what I told you about a hall master of my nether pavilion suffering a blood sentence? Yang Yi nodded as he naturally remembered. Nether Maiden walked over to the woman who was full of resentment. She's that hall master who suffered a blood sentence, and she's our fourth sister, Resentment Maiden. Yang Ye's mind was filled with questions. Isn't she dead? Nether Maiden shook her head. She didn't die. We used a special method to protect her. Yang Yi said, I'm still quite confused. Based on the strength all of you possessed, the Alliance of Guardians wouldn't have been able to harm you at all. But you were forced into such a situation all those years ago. Nether Maiden replied, We did it on purpose. Yang Yi asked, Why? Nether Maiden glanced at Resentment Maiden, and the latter nodded slightly before Nether Maiden continued. Fourth sister possesses the Heaven's Envy physique, so she lived a life of being punished by the heavens. There's something absolutely terrifying about this physique, and it's that even if she dies, it'll follow her to her next life. So, she's bound by misfortune for lifetimes and targeted by the Heaven Tao for lifetimes. However, once 10 lifetimes pass, her physique will undergo a transformation. Yang Yi frowned. A transformation? Nether Maiden nodded. Once 10 lifetimes are over, the Heaven Tao won't just cease to target her. She'll even gain control over the energy of misfortune. Nether Maiden paused for a moment at this point and continued. The energy of misfortune. Let me explain it like this. If fourth sister were to use it against you, then you'll suffer absolute misfortune from now on. Moreover, regardless of where you go, the eye of the Heaven Tao will immediately descend upon you if your aura is exposed in the slightest, and it'll stop at nothing to kill you. Yang Yi was visibly moved. The energy of misfortune. Absolute misfortune and even being pursued to death by the eye of the Heaven Tao. Just thinking about it was quite terrifying. Even though the eye of the Heaven Tao targeted him as well, it was under the circumstances that he killed others. But once he was affected by the energy of misfortune, then he didn't even have to kill because just exposing his aura would make the eye of the Heaven Tao come looking for him. In other words, Resentment Maiden could use the Eye of the Heaven Tao and make it her ally. Meanwhile, Nether Maiden added, "Understand? After the 10th lifetime passes, Fourth Sister is able to forcefully extract the energy of misfortune within her and control it. Of course, experiencing 10 lifetimes isn't the only requirement to control the energy of misfortune. For the sake of taking control of the energy of misfortune, Fourth Sister didn't hesitate to enter the cycle of reincarnation for 10 lifetimes, and she suffered the most painful torture in the world throughout every lifetime of hers." Nether Maiden fell silent when she spoke up to this point. The pig-riding young woman lowered her head slightly and remained silent. Meanwhile, Resentment Maiden shook her head slightly. "There's no need to be sad about that. If I had resolved to enter the cycle of reincarnation earlier, that wouldn't have happened to eldest sister and second sister." Xianxia asked, "Then why was she like that just now?" Resentment Maiden was in the form of a face earlier, and she seemed to not recognize Nether Maiden and the others. Resentment Maiden suddenly said, "Tell the little fellow everything." "Little fellow." Xianxia's face was quite dark. Nether Maiden nodded. Fourth Sister's consciousness was in battle with the energy of misfortune, so she wasn't conscious at all. She was being controlled by her negative emotions just now. "We didn't dare to let her leave because we were afraid that she would go to a medium world. After all, once she entered a medium world, the Eye of the Heaven Tao would appear. Once the Eye of the Heaven Tao of a medium world appears, then the suffering she endured for the last 10 lifetimes of hers would be wasted. So that's why." Xianxia finally came to an understanding when he heard her. Simply speaking, Resentment Maiden's death had been done on purpose, and the reason they'd gathered in the Radiant Dimension was to wait for Resentment Maiden to come back to life. Xianxia asked, "Then what about those fellows from the large world?" Their expressions instantly turned cold when they heard Xianxia. Nether Maiden spoke in a low voice. "They naturally don't want Fourth Sister to take control of the energy of misfortune. So they started to act against us a while back. However, because of the restrictions of the Supreme Heaven Tao, they weren't able to send true experts down here, nor did they dare to do so. After all, they wouldn't dare to face Third Sister once they descend here and suffer a huge decline in their cultivations." The pig-riding young woman said, "Our current strength really is insufficient to fight them in the large world, but if they come down here and have their cultivations restrained, then they might perish. They dare not take such a gamble. So, they had no choice but to play such tricks. Actually, it was all thanks to you." Meanwhile, Nether Maiden said, "We misjudged our strength a little. We thought just Boundary Maiden and Ice Maiden would be able to suppress Fourth Sister, but we far underestimated her ability. So, she was almost able to escape. Once that happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. The consequences would have been unimaginable if you weren't able to stop all those fellows." All of them gazed at Xianxia. While they didn't speak, there was a trace of acknowledgement in their eyes. Actually, they'd helped Xianxia previously because of Nether Maiden. Because he was friends with her, they gave her face and helped him while he was in the Radiant Dimension. Yet now, they truly acknowledged him and treated him as one of their own. Because if it wasn't for Xianxia, they would have been in huge trouble. Of course, the main reason was they felt that Xianxia was a really good friend. After all, he hadn't chosen to leave under such circumstances, and it proved that Nether Maiden hadn't misjudged him. Actually, they didn't have a good impression of Xianxia because they were afraid that Nether Maiden was a bad judge of character. But now it would seem like Xianxia was quite a good guy. Xianxia smiled. "We're all friends, so there's no need for that." He wasn't being polite because Nether Maiden was a friend that he'd gone through life and death with. Moreover, the Nether Pavilion had helped him in the past. It wasn't just on Radiant Dimension. He'd even received help on Dark Hell Continent. So, if the Nether Pavilion was in trouble, he would absolutely not stand by idly. Nether Maiden glanced at him and remained silent. Meanwhile, Xianxia seemed to have thought of something and said, The Nether Pavilion has 10 halls, and that Shadow Maiden." He still remembered how he'd killed a Shadow Maiden in the Radiant Dimension. All of them gazed at Xianxia when they heard this. Xianxia's eyelids twitched. I. Meanwhile, Nether Maiden said, "She wasn't the real Shadow Maiden." Xianxia was astounded. She wasn't. Nether Maiden nodded. If it was the true Shadow Maiden, you wouldn't have been able to kill her. We'd thought she was the real Shadow Maiden. So we'd sent our forces to look for her in Pine Prefecture. But later on, we realized that she was just someone who'd comprehended the laws of darkness like Shadow Maiden. She glanced at Xianxia and continued. If she was the real Shadow Maiden, you wouldn't have just been unable to kill her, you might have been in danger instead. Really? Xianxia continued. The laws of darkness aren't that strong. He wasn't lying because his laws of darkness were quite useless right now, especially when he was up against Voiders. Nether Maiden shook her head and said, Shadow Maiden doesn't just possess the laws of darkness. In short, if you have the chance to meet her, you'll understand. Xianxia nodded, and then he glanced at them and said, Blind Maiden, Resentment Maiden, Boundary Maiden, Shadow Maiden, Oblivion Maiden, Nether Maiden, Ice Maiden, Light Maiden, and that fellow who rides a pig. If your eldest sister and second sister are included, then, if I didn't make a mistake in my calculation, aren't there more than 10 of you? He'd heard from Nether Maiden that the Nether Pavilion only had 10 halls and 10 hall masters. Yet now there was an extra one. Nether Maiden and the others gazed at the pig-riding young woman, and then the latter spoke indifferently. I'm not from the Nether Pavilion. Nether Maiden said, She's second sister's younger sister. She survived all those years ago, so she has been following us ever since. So that's why. Xianxia nodded. I understand everything now. I have no further questions. All of you are from the large world. Meanwhile, the old man in linen robes spoke abruptly. If he could, he naturally wanted to leave. But not to mention leaving, he couldn't even move right now. Resentment Maiden shot a glance at him. She didn't say a word and just waved her hand lightly. And then a ray of red light swept out and obliterated the old man. Xianxia was visibly moved. She's really strong and absolutely not inferior to Jiansu. Perhaps she's only slightly inferior to Blind Maiden. Meanwhile, Nether Maiden said, We're leaving. Xianxia immediately asked, Where to? To look for our eldest sister and second sister. Nether Maiden continued, Boundary Maiden has found Shadow Maiden, so only our second sister and eldest sister are left. We can return to the large world once we find them. They are going to return to the large world. Xianxia was shocked. He naturally didn't think that they were heading back there to enjoy the scenery. He didn't know what exactly had occurred in the past. But he knew that a storm of blood would definitely sweep through the large world once they returned. Suddenly, a powerful aura appeared in the sky above the radiant dimension. Of course, it was very weak in Resentment Maiden's eyes. It didn't take long for a man to appear before them. The man glanced through the surroundings, and his gaze locked onto Xianxia in the end. You're that fellow, Xianxia, right? Lien Suyao wasn't lying, you really are heavily injured. These women by your side are probably those women from the Nether Pavilion, right? Nice, I can get all of you in one fell swoop. A few dozen permits. Ha ha ha. He seemed to have noticed something at this point, and his voice stopped abruptly. The man's gaze had descended onto Resentment Maiden, and it didn't take long for him to turn ghastly pale. He was just about to speak when she suddenly waved her hand, and then a wave of dark red light swept forward before the man was obliterated. Xianxia shook his head. If the man had arrived a little earlier, he might have had the chance to take Xianxia's head. Yet now, wasn't he just giving his life away? After she obliterated the man, Resentment Maiden gazed at Xianxia and flicked a shiny stone to Xianxia. A little surprise flashed through the others' eyes when they saw the stone, and there was a trace of envy in their eyes as well. It was especially so for the pig-riding young woman. Her eyes were glowing, and it seemed like she wanted to take it from Xianxia. Xianxia was puzzled. What's this? The World Mend Stone. Resentment Maiden continued. I'll spare you the details about its origins. You just have to know that once you refine and absorb it, it's equivalent to possessing a second Dantian, because it has a pocket of space within it, and it can store profound energy. If you keep it filled, then it can be your second Dantian to provide you profound energy when you really need it. Xianxia was visibly moved when he heard this. He immediately took the stone in both hands and seemed as if he was afraid someone would take it from him. It was a treasure, a huge treasure. It was even more precious than an origin rank treasure. The volume of profound energy he could store was already much greater than others in the same realm of cultivation. But he was still only able to execute the true form of Heavenren twice, because it really consumed too much profound energy. Yet now, he could execute the true form of Heavenren 2 more times with the Worldmen's Stone. For Heavenrens, coupled with the stellar energy he could absorb via the stellar ward technique, he could execute around 7 Heavenrens in the future. Moreover, it would definitely be able to save his life at a critical moment, because his profound energy had dried up in many of his battles. So he couldn't repair his body swiftly. Just like this very moment, he was relying on the stellar ward technique to keep himself standing. If he had the Worldmen's Stone, he wouldn't have to do that at all, because he would have extra profound energy so he could use it to repair his body while he fought. So, the Worldmen's Stone was absolutely useful to Xianxia. Meanwhile, Nether Maiden suddenly spoke. "That's Fourth Sister's treasure." Xianxia put the Worldmen's Stone away before he gazed at Resentment Maiden, and he said, "Thank you, Fourth Sister." Resentment Maiden was slightly stunned. She hadn't expected Xianxia to address her as Fourth Sister, just as Nether Maiden and the others did. She was slightly unaccustomed to it, but it didn't take long for her to return to normal. She nodded and said, "You helped us today, so the experts of the large world probably hold a grudge against you. Be careful when you head there in the future." Xianxia nodded. "I will." He would naturally not dare to underestimate the experts of the large world. However, he didn't really fear them either. In any case, they didn't dare to come down here. But if he went to the large world in the future, then he really had to be a little careful. Resentment Maiden nodded slightly, and then she gazed at Nether Maiden and the others. "Let's go." As soon as she finished speaking, her figure flashed and vanished into the sky. It didn't take long for Light Maiden, Oblivion Maiden, and the others to follow her. Only Nether Maiden and the pig-riding young woman remained here. The pig-riding young woman walked over to Xianxia's side and patted him on the shoulder. "Thank you for just now." As soon as she finished speaking, her figure shot up and vanished in the sky. Meanwhile, Nether Maiden suddenly said, "They wanted to kill you in the past." Xianxia was puzzled. "Why?" Nether Maiden smiled. "They were afraid that you would take advantage of me." Xianxia was at a loss for words. Nether Maiden restrained her smile and said, "We're leaving. I wonder if we'll have another chance to meet." Xianxia asked, "You'll be heading to the large world, right?" Nether Maiden nodded. "Definitely." Xianxia nodded and smiled. "I'll definitely be heading there too. So we'll meet again, right?" She gazed at him for a long time before she said, "See you there." Her figure vanished into the sky once she finished speaking. "See you there." Xianxia took a deep breath, and then he turned around and vanished on the spot. White Deer Academy. Once he returned to his room in the academy, Xianxia immediately went to the cultivation room on the 3rd level. As soon as he entered it, his figure collapsed to the ground. After that, the scales on his body vanished rapidly. Once the scales vanished, threads of blood instantly started seeping out of him because his body was all cracked open. Xiaoyushi was shocked by this scene, and she hurriedly grabbed Xianxia's hand and spoke in a trembling voice. Are you all right?" Xianxia shook his head and smiled. "I'm fine. Don't worry." He really was fine. Even though his body had cracked apart, they were just external injuries. His internal organs hadn't suffered any injuries under the protection of the stellar ward technique. However, his physical strength was severely overexhausted. Exhaustion. That was the state he was currently in. Xianxia withdrew some divine crystals and started swallowing them like a madman. Spirit energy surged into him before being completely absorbed by the primordial pagoda, and then threads of violet energy flowed out from within it. As soon as the violet energy appeared within him, they were fully absorbed by his body, and his body gradually recovered under the effects of the primordial violet energy. Xiaoyushi gradually relaxed when she saw his injuries recovering, and a wisp of pain flashed through her eyes as she gazed at him. Xianxia's life was too exhausting. Since she'd known him, he'd been fighting and charging forward throughout his life. His footsteps were very swift and practically never stopped. She understood that it wasn't wrong as he was a man. If a man didn't fight and charge forward, how would he protect his family? But Xianxia's life was too exhausting. He carried too much on his shoulders. Time trickled by. Xianxia's body recovered rapidly under the effects of the primordial violet energy, and it took less than a day for him to recover completely. Once his body recovered, Xiangyi started refining the Worldmen's Stone. He didn't encounter any problems during the process, and it didn't take long for it to be completely refined and absorbed. A link was formed between it and his mind, and it resided by the primordial pagoda side once it was fully refined and absorbed. A second Dantian. Now that he had the Worldmen's Stone, he didn't have to worry so much about his profound energy. He left the primordial pagoda with Xiao Yushi once everything was done. In the sky above White Deer Dimension. At this moment, White Deer Academy seemed exceptionally quiet because Xiao Bieli and the others had left. Xiao Yushi's gaze descended onto White Deer City, which was filled with ordinary cultivators. What about the ordinary people here? Yang Yi replied, the Alliance of Guardians won't act against them. Conversely, if we stay here, then they would truly be in danger. Actually, it can also be considered as an opportunity for them. Xiao Yushi was puzzled. An opportunity? Yang Yi nodded. Most of the powers in the Radiant Dimension have been destroyed by me. Presently, the Radiant Dimension is just waiting to be rebuilt. If it wasn't for the Alliance of Guardians, I would have been willing to develop my sword alliance here. However, this is part of the Alliance of Guardians territory, so staying here will only bring harm to them. Moreover, I have an even more important matter to attend to, so I can't pay any attention to the Radiant Dimension. Xiao Yushi nodded lightly. Where are we going now? To see someone before we leave the Radiant Dimension. As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi took Xiao Yushi's hand and vanished on the spot. Ocean of Clouds Merchant Group. Yang Yi brought Xiao Yushi to the Ocean of Clouds Merchant Group. He was here to see by Xianxia, of course. She'd taken a huge risk to lend him the Imperial Cloud Shuttle all those years ago, so he naturally couldn't forget that debt he owed her. Moreover, she'd even helped him on many occasions. So he was here to repay the favor. In the hall, Bai Xiangyao's gaze descended onto Yang Yi, and there was a trace of complicated emotions in her eyes as she gazed at him. Yang Yi had grown too quickly. Just a few years ago, he'd been pursued all over the Radiant Dimension. Yet now, as soon as he returned, he'd swept through all the powers of the Radiant Dimension with matchless strength. He grew too quickly. Yang Yi smiled. Miss Bai, long time no see. He was quite grateful to her. He was grateful for all the help she'd given him, and he would never forget it. Bai Xiangyao's gaze paused on Xiao Yushi for a moment, and then she smiled. It has only been a few years since we last saw each other, yet you've already grown to such an extent. It's really quite a blow to my confidence. Yang Yi smiled, waved his right hand, and then a spatial ring appeared before Bai Xiangyao. Bai Xiangyao glanced at Yang Yi, took the spatial ring, and then gave its contents a glance. After that, she looked up at Yang Yi and spoke with surprise. Imperial Cloud Shuttles? Yang Yi nodded. Within the spatial ring were the 2 Imperial Cloud Shuttles he'd obtained within the ruins on Dark Hell Continent. He had the Void Cloud Shuttle now, so he naturally had no use for the Imperial Cloud Shuttles. Bai Xiangyao said, these aren't ordinary Imperial Cloud Shuttles. They are much better than the one I lent you all those years ago. Yang Yi smiled. I borrowed one from you, but because of certain reasons, I hadn't been able to return it to you in a timely manner. I'm truly sorry about that. So treat those 2 Imperial Cloud Shuttles as my apology. Bai Xiangyao pondered deeply for a few breaths of time, and then she nodded and took the spatial ring. She was very well aware that based on Yang Ye's current strength, the Imperial Cloud Shuttles were of no use to him. Meanwhile, Yang Yi added, Miss Bai, I own a medium world in Dark Hellstellar region. The restrictions there have just been removed, so it has just started to recover. Are you interested in opening up a branch there? It was impossible to bring prosperity to Dark Hell Continent if he relied solely on the Sword Alliance's development. he had to draw over even more people to Dark Hell Continent. It was best if he could transform it into a place like Stellar City. After all, it was obvious how terrifying the yearly income of Stellar City was. A medium world? Bai Xiangyao was surprised. You have a medium world? Yang Yi replied, I can't really be considered one right now. It can only be considered a small world for now, but it'll recover slowly. Bai Xiangyao took a deep and long glance at Yang Yi, and then she said, I'm naturally willing to open a branch there. After all, it was an absolutely good thing for her, so she would naturally not refuse. Yang Yi nodded. But I have a condition. You have to represent your merchant group. If it's anyone else, tell them that if it isn't you, then there's no need to go there. Bai Xiangyao said, Thank you. After all, now that Yang Yi had said that, she was the only one in the merchant group who could expand their business there, so her status would naturally rise tremendously. Don't mention it. Yang Yi smiled. Once you arrive at Dark Hell Continent, you can look for the Sword Alliance's Yunban Qing if you need anything or need some help. Right? Even if you have some private matters to resolve, you can come seek my help. I will definitely not refuse if it's within my ability. Bai Xiangyao smiled. Then you'll be my backing from now on. Yang Yi smiled and said, Miss Bai, see you on Dark Hell Continent. Farewell. As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi didn't stay a moment longer. He immediately took Xiao Yushi's hand and vanished from the hall. Meanwhile, Bai Xiangyao silently looked up at the sky outside the hall. In the sky, Xiao Yushi asked, Where are we going now? To fulfill a promise. Now that he was done with his business in the Radiant Dimension, Yang Yi naturally intended to travel to Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region. After all, Lady was still waiting for him. However, he didn't go there directly, and he came to Stellar City first. How powerful was Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region? Yet it was still being pushed back repeatedly before Celestial Demon Stellar Region. So it was utterly pointless to head there rashly. After all, his goal was to help Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region and not just Lady. If his goal was just to help Lady, then with the strength she possessed, could anyone stop her from going anywhere else in the world? So, he had to prepare. Stellar City. Leaf and Cloud. Leaf and Cloud was a small store that Yi Luyun had started in Stellar City. Because it had just started operating, it wasn't selling anything. In the hall, Yi Luyun's heart finally relaxed when she saw Yang Yi. Yang Yi was the Sword Alliance's backbone. If he was gone, then the Sword Alliance on Dark Hell Continent and everything else in Stellar City would collapse. Even though Yang Yi had wives, he was gone. Su Qingshi and the other strengths were utterly insufficient to take control of the Sword Alliance. Moreover, they wouldn't dare to maintain control of it. Because if they tried to while not possessing sufficient strength, it would only bring calamity to them. So nothing should ever happen to Yang Yi. Because Yang Yi's footsteps were too quick, and the Sword Alliance's development was extremely swift as well, there was a drawback. The drawback was instability. Yang Yi was the reason most people in the Sword Alliance stayed. They were gathered here because they thought highly of Yang Yi's future, and that was why they were willing to fight together. However, if he was gone, then many would leave. If they didn't have a leader with potential, then they would have no hope in the Sword Alliance. At that time, even Yi Luyun might leave. The Sword Alliance existed while Yang Yi existed. Yi Luyun restrained her thoughts, glanced at Xiao Yushi, and then gazed at Yang Yi and spoke softly. Is it done? Yang Yi nodded. I've resolved everything in the Radiant Dimension. Yi Luyun asked, You're heading to Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region now? Yang Yi shook his head. I've decided against that for now. Yi Luyun asked, You intend to attack the Alliance of Guardians headquarters? Yang Yi glanced at her with a trace of surprise in his eyes. How did you know? Yi Luyun pondered deeply for a moment and replied, I've been gathering information on Sky River Stellar Region, Celestial Demon Stellar Region, and Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region since you left. Celestial Demon Stellar Region is the strongest amongst them. It's a 3-star stellar region. Sky River Stellar Region is a 1-star stellar region. As for Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region, it was once a 3-star stellar region as well. Yet now, they only have control over a few worlds, so they can't even be considered a 2-star stellar region. Once Yi Luyun finished speaking, Yang Yi asked, 1 star? 3 stars? What's that? Yi Luyun explained, all the stellar regions beneath besides the large world itself are ranked by 1 to 4 stars. 4 stars are the greatest, and they belong to the stellar regions who have a chance of charging into the large world. Conversely, 1 star is the lowest. For example, Sky River stellar region only possesses over a dozen worlds, and it doesn't have many deities as well. Yang Yi asked, how many stars does our Dark Hell stellar region possess? Yi Luyun glanced at him and spoke flatly, not even 1. It's beneath the rankings. Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Yi Luyun continued, we don't have deities, and we have just 1 world. Even though it was once a medium world, it's no different to a small world right now. She paused for a moment and continued, we have a long way ahead of us. Yang Yi nodded and said, there's no rush, let's take it slow. Go on. Yi Luyun continued, actually, Clouds of Heaven stellar region should have vanished a long time ago. However, it has been able to hold on for so long because of that woman, Zhuang Weiran. She's an extraordinary genius with absolutely terrifying strength. If she's given the time, then Celestial Demon stellar region would probably dare not attack Clouds of Heaven stellar region. Zhuang Weiran. Yang Yi clenched his fists. Obviously, she was enduring extremely heavy pressure right now. After all, she just had to agree, and Wildland stellar region would lend her stellar region a hand. However, Lady hadn't. The consequence was that she had to shoulder the responsibility of fighting Celestial Demon stellar region. The lives of countless within her stellar region were carried on her shoulders. Yi Luyun added, even though Clouds of Heaven stellar region was pushed back repeatedly while she resisted persistently, it still existed. If you want to reduce her burden, then there's a way to do that quickly, and it's to launch a surprise attack on Sky River stellar region's headquarters and force Sky River stellar region to bring its forces back. So long as that happened, Clouds of Heaven stellar region would be able to catch its breath a little. However, that will only be a temporary measure. Yang Yi asked, where's the Alliance of Guardians headquarters? Actually, he'd wanted to head over there while he was in the Radiant Dimension. However, he didn't know where it was. Moreover, he couldn't travel through space over extended periods because it consumed too much profound energy. So, he had no choice but to return to Stellar City. Yi Luyun gazed at him for quite some time before she asked, are you really going? Yang Yi nodded. I have to. Yi Luyun remained silent for a short while, and then she said, Sky River Continent, Sky River City. That's where their headquarters resides. It was jointly formed by some independent cultivators and small worlds. It has around 5 deities, and my initial estimations put their semi-deities at around 15 or more. Besides that, it had at least 30 or 40 true voiders. 5 deities. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. One had died earlier. In other words, they had 4 more deities. Besides that, their semi-deities couldn't be underestimated as well. After all, if he wanted to kill semi-deities, then he had to use the true form of Heavenrend. It was impossible for him to use the true form of Heavenrend on over a dozen semi-deities. Meanwhile, Yi Luyun added, your objective isn't the annihilate Sky River stellar region. It's to force them to bring their experts back. So long as they retreat, you will have accomplished your goal. Understand? Yang Yi nodded and said, I understand. It was definitely impossible for him to annihilate Sky River stellar region on his own. All he could do was force them to retreat and reduce the pressure that Lady endured. Meanwhile, Yi Luyun spoke with an extremely serious expression on her face. Remember that you must retreat once they bring their forces back. Otherwise, you might be besieged by numerous deities. Yang Yi smiled. Don't worry. I won't do something stupid like fighting a few deities. Even though he was confident, he wasn't confident to the point of thinking he could fight 4 deities on his own. Not to mention the 4 deities, he would have to flee even if those semi-deities swarmed him. Yi Luyun spoke solemnly. You must realize that you are linked to the fate of numerous people. Many will die if something happens to you. That makes me feel even more pressure. Yang Yi laughed bitterly. Looks like I absolutely can't die. Yi Luyun glanced at him and said, Actually, I'm quite curious. You sword cultivators stress upon being unrestrained and having a free heart that's without any shackles. But you carry so much on your shoulders. Logically speaking, it's impossible for your attainments in the sword Dao to be so outstanding. But it just so happens that it's extremely formidable, and it isn't inferior to Jian Wuji at all. Yang Yi replied, actually, what you just said is absolutely right, and many sword cultivators are without restraint. Since there are no shackles on their hearts, they can focus on the sword, and so their attainments in the sword Dao are extremely formidable. However, I'm unlike them. You have to realize that the reason I cultivate the sword is so that I can protect my loved ones, and it isn't for the sake of pursuing the so-called limits of the sword Dao. In my opinion, the sword is a weapon to kill, and a weapon to protect my loved ones. The reason I cultivate it bitterly is to protect my loved ones, and it isn't purely for the sake of the sword Dao. Understand? Yi Luyun fell silent. Yang Yi continued, in my opinion, my wives, my child, and all of you who follow me aren't shackles but motivation. The reason I continuously work hard on becoming strong is because I want to protect all of you. All of you are my motivation to grow stronger without end. A wisp of tender affection flashed through Xiao Yushi's eyes when she heard him, and then she held his hand tightly. Meanwhile, Yi Luyun suddenly said, then what about yourself? Have you never thought about yourself? Like authority, women, or eternal life? Yang Yi was stunned because he really didn't pursue anything for himself. Authority, women. Authority was no different to trash in his eyes. Even if he was allowed to be the Yang clan's patriarch, he wouldn't be interested. Women. He did pursue that a little, but he was really content with what he had. Because he had Su Qingshi, Xiao Yushi, and the others. As for eternal life, actually, he didn't care about eternal life. All he wanted was to just live a peaceful and comfortable life with Su Qingshi, Xiao Yushi, and the others. The longer one lived, the easier it was for problems to arise. A short while passed before Yang Yi shook his head and chuckled. He took Xiao Yushi's hand and said, actually, so long as the people I care about are all right, then everything is all right. Let's not talk about these things that are just a waste of time. I'm going to Sky River Stellar region now. Liyun, I'll leave everything here to you. Take care of your own safety and keep an eye on the situation between Clouds of Heaven Stellar region and Celestial Demon Stellar region at all times. Immediately send me a voice transmission if there's anything urgent. Yi Luyun spoke softly. Be careful. Yang Yi nodded, and then he vanished on the spot with Xiao Yushi. Meanwhile, Yi Luyun remained silent for a long time, and then she spoke softly. Protecting. Actually, you're the same as Jian Wuji. Even though yours is selfish, being selfish is the best. Yang Yi didn't waste time and immediately used the teleportation formations in Stellar City to teleport himself to Sky River Continent. There was a defensive formation in the sky above Sky River Continent, and it was guarded as well. However, the guards weren't able to notice Yang Yi while he was enveloped beneath his sword domain. So he was able to arrive at Sky River City. Sky River City was the Alliance of Guardians headquarters. The sword spirit stood by Yang Ye's side and asked, are you going to carry out assassinations? Yang Yi gazed at the city for a short while before he shook his head and said, that would be too subtle. I have to make it flashy. As soon as he finished speaking, he gazed at the sword spirit. The sword spirit gazed at Yang Yi for a long time, and then she nodded and transformed into the sword precursor that entered the ancient sheath. Yang Yi grabbed the sword precursor's hilt tightly with his right hand. A wisp of ferocity curled up on the corners of his mouth while he gazed at Sky River City, and then he suddenly drew his sword and swung it in the city's direction. OM! A sharp and ear-piercing sword howl suddenly resounded through Sky River Continent, and then a snow-white beam of sword energy shot out from Yang Ye's ancient sheath. It shot forward like a bolt of lightning towards Sky River City. Everywhere it passed, space was instantly sliced open. At the same time, the space in an area of around 1 kilometer in its vicinity collapsed inch by inch, creating a huge spatial rift that extended from Yang Yi towards Sky River City. At the moment the sword howl resounded, everyone within Sky River City was horrified. As for the experts on the city walls, their souls almost left their bodies when they saw Yang Ye's sword energy. Yang Yi watched as the sword energy entered Sky River City, and then it was instantly split into two. Bang! A loud explosion resounded from afar, and it was accompanied by countless shrill cries. They didn't have the chance to flee, and many hadn't even been able to react. It appeared too abruptly and too swiftly. Even the defensive formation around Sky River City hadn't been able to react in time before the sword energy sliced the city into two. Xianxia's face was cold and indifferent as he gazed at the distant city which had been split into two. There was naturally a reason why he'd made such a flashy show of strength. Lady was definitely under immense pressure. So, he wanted to use actions to tell the world and Lady that she wasn't fighting alone. So, he had to try his best to draw attention. The more attention he drew, the lesser the pressure Lady endured would be. Because both the experts of Sky River Stellar Region and Celestial Demon Stellar Region would definitely send some of their forces to deal with him. Who did this? Suddenly, a furious howl resounded from Sky River City, and then over a dozen formidable auras shot up into the air and charged in Xianxia's direction. All of them were semi-deities. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he sheathed his sword while his profound energy circulated madly. It didn't take long for 13 old men to appear in front of Yang Yi. The white-haired old man who led the group was stunned when he saw Yang Yi's appearance. He hadn't expected that the person who launched this sudden attack on Sky River City would be so young. But it didn't take long for ferocity to cover his face. "Who are you? Why have you attacked my alliance of guardians?" A sword howl suddenly interrupted the old man, and then a strand of sword energy flashed out from the ancient sheath and carried an aura of absolute destruction as it shot towards the old man. The old man's pupils constricted at the sight of it. He wanted to fight back or flee, but it was too late, because he was too close to Yang Yi, and Yang Yi had immediately drawn his sword without saying a word. So, the old man hadn't put up his guard at all, and he could only watch as the sword energy struck his body. Hiss! The sword energy flashed by, and then the old man's figure was instantly obliterated. At the same time, the powerful wave of force created by the sword energy blasted all the others around 3 kilometers away. All of them were shocked. However, Yang Yi didn't waste his breath. He just drew his sword and swung it again. A beam of sword energy flashed, and then another old man was instantly obliterated. However, Yang Yi didn't stop there. He sheathed his sword again and drew it swiftly, and then another old man vanished on the spot. In an instant, 3 semi-deities had been killed, and the remaining 10 were stunned. Meanwhile, Yang Yi sheathed his sword once more. All 10 old men were horrified by the sight of this. At this moment, they didn't hesitate to turn around and vanish on the spot. They didn't fight. Why? Because they were completely horrified right now. Semi-deities, those that had died were semi-deities. However, they hadn't even been able to react before Yang Yi killed 3 of them. At this moment, all of them felt that they couldn't resist Yang Yi. Actually, they were utterly horrified. They couldn't be blamed for that. As semi-deities, their mental strength and courage were definitely outstanding. But the problem was that Yang Yi was too terrifying. He hadn't said a word before instantly killing 3 semi-deities. He'd killed them in an instant. He hadn't fought them one by one, in battle. He just swung his sword 3 times and killed 2 semi-deities. And those semi-deities probably didn't even know how they died. Actually, they felt that Yang Yi was definitely a deity. Only a true deity was capable of killing semi-deities like they were just helpless chicks. A cold smile curled up on the corners of Yang Yi's mouth when he saw them flee. He didn't chase after them and just vanished on the spot. For attacks. He'd drawn his sword 4 times just now, and the profound energy within his body and the Worldmen's Stone had been completely exhausted. If the 10 remaining semi-deities had disregarded their safety and attacked him, then he would have no choice but to utilize the Stellar Ward technique. Moreover, even if he did that, he would be in a very bad situation, because absorbing stellar energy would only allow him to draw his sword 3 more times. But they had 10 experts on their side. Unfortunately, they hadn't dared to stay and fight him. Actually, this was the reason why Yang Yi hadn't said anything and just killed 3 of them. He'd done so to give others the misconception that he was matchless and impossible to defeat. He'd succeeded. His actions of killing 3 semi-deities in succession had made their mental defenses collapse, and they didn't even have the courage to fight him, so he had the opportunity to catch his breath. Xianxia didn't flee after he left. He just used his sword domain to conceal himself and entered Sky River City. Of course, he'd changed his clothes. His green clothes had been changed into a white robe, and his sword had been exchanged for a folding fan. He seemed like a rich young master. At this moment, Sky River City was filled with howls of sorrow. Countless people were crying with fear and fleeing madly, because everyone felt that a deity had launched a surprise attack on Sky River City. Xianxia paid no attention to them, and he just entered a wrecked pavilion. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings before entering the primordial pagoda, and then he immediately went to the 3rd level. After that, he withdrew divine crystals and started absorbing them. The effects of the 3rd level were truly heaven-defying to the extreme. For example, if he were to repair his body and fill both his body and the Worldmen's Stone's reserves of profound energy, then it would take at least 2 or 3 days in the outside world. It took the same time in the 3rd level of the primordial pagoda, but 2 or 3 days here was only equivalent to around 2 to 4 hours in the outside world. Regardless of whether it was used to cultivate or for other purposes, the 3rd level of the primordial pagoda was extremely terrifying. Actually, Xianxia really looked forward to the 4th level. Every single level of the primordial pagoda had given him a huge pleasant surprise. So what surprise would the 4th level bring him? Moreover, he hadn't forgotten what the divine inflame had said. He should go see it once he could access the 4th level. The divine inflame had definitely not told him that because it wanted to chat with him. Perhaps it would submit to him and protect him once he could access the 4th level. If the divine inflame is willing to submit to me. Just thinking about that made Xianxia excited. Xianxia restrained his thoughts and started to absorb the energy within the divine crystals. Time passed slowly. 2 days later, Xianxia opened his eyes, and he'd recovered to his peak state. Xianxia glanced at Xianxia. At this moment, she was looking at him too. He grinned, walked over to her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her softly on the lips before he said, "Don't worry. If I want to flee, then even deities wouldn't be able to catch me." Xianxia spoke softly, "Be careful." Xianxia nodded, and then he vanished on the spot. Once Xianxia left, Xianxia remained silent for a long time before she spoke softly, "I'll work hard on my cultivation." Sky River City. At this moment, the city was still in a mess. Actually, the chaos wasn't entirely Xianxia's fault, and it was because many within the city had taken advantage of the situation to seek personal gain. Once Xianxia slashed the city into 2, order had started to vanish within the city because everyone was busy taking care of themselves. So, at this moment, some had started to arouse malicious thoughts and took advantage of the situation. So, fighting and killing for treasures was going on throughout the city. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings, and then suddenly stretched out his hand. A man instantly appeared within his grasp. The man was horrified and was about to speak when Xianxia spoke first. "Where are the experts of the Alliance?" He couldn't sweep the city with his divine sense, because they would notice it. He wanted to take them by surprise. The man was clearly terrified, and he even stuttered, At the city governor's estate." Xianxia asked, "Which way?" The man raised his trembling hand and pointed to the side. Xianxia nodded, released the man, and then vanished on the spot. Meanwhile, cold sweat was flowing from the man. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something, and then his pupils constricted. Was he the one who slashed the city into 2? Xianxia didn't waste any time and shot rapidly towards the city governor's estate. Of course, he didn't travel there openly. He made a show of strength when needed, but he knew when to keep a low profile. After all, keeping a low profile now made it easier for him to accomplish his goal. Xianxia stood before a wall as he looked up at a huge palace in the distance. It was extremely large and luxurious, and there were numerous obscure and powerful auras within it. Xianxia remained silent for an instant before the ancient sheath appeared in his grasp. There was a sword in it, the sword precursor. A wisp of ferocity curled up on the corners of Xianxia's mouth as he gazed at the distant palace. And then he didn't hesitate to grab the sword's hilt with his right hand and draw it. OM! A sword howl suddenly resounded through Sky River City, and the countenance of everyone within the city instantly turned ghastly pale. It's here again. Bang! The palace shattered before Xianxia, and then countless shrill cries instantly resounded. Xianxia sheathed his sword, and then vanished on the spot. Around 5 breaths of time later, another sword howl resounded through the city. After that, a beam of sword energy descended from the sky, and it shot down like a bolt of lightning that was striking down upon Sky River City. The sword energy shot into the city. Bang! The shattered remains of Sky River City were instantly blasted into bits. Cries of shock and misery resounded incessantly throughout the city. The lucky survivors fled madly towards the surroundings because no one dared to stay in the city now. Xianxia watched coldly from high above, and there was no pity in his eyes. Feeling pity for one's enemies was foolish. His plan was to cause the greatest commotion as possible, try his best to make the Alliance of Guardians call back its forces from Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region, try his best to draw the attention of Celestial Demon Stellar Region and Sky River Stellar Region, and try his best to alleviate the pressure Lady was enduring. The best way to do that was what he was doing right now. Even their base of operations had been destroyed, so he refused to believe that the experts from the Alliance of Guardians could still remain calm and composed. Of course, it didn't matter if they really refused to return. In any case, there were no deities in Sky River Stellar Region, so he could kill as he pleased. A wisp of ruthlessness curled up on the corners of Xianxia's mouth as he looked down below, and then he sheathed his sword. At the same time, the profound energy within the Worldmen's Stone started to circulate madly. Rumble! Meanwhile, 10 auras shot up into the air from the ruins of Sky River City. It didn't take long for 10 old men to appear where Xianxia had been standing. At this moment, Xianxia was gone. The black-robed man who led the group spoke ferociously. Who is that? Why is he targeting our Alliance of Guardians? Meanwhile, a gray-robed old man by his side spoke solemnly. It should be Xianxia. Xianxia. All of them gazed at the gray-robed old man, and then they seemed to have thought of something, causing their expressions to become extremely unsightly. That name was naturally not unfamiliar to them. It belonged to someone that the Alliance of Guardians had unanimously agreed to eliminate, because Xianxia's strength was too terrifying. The largest reason was Xianxia's natural talent and potential. In just less than 2 years, Xianxia had grown to the point of being able to kill semi-deities. If he attained the Voider realm, would he be able to kill deities like they were just helpless sheep? So, the only deity left in Sky River Stellar Region had decided to head to the Radiant Dimension. Logically speaking, since a deity had gone to deal with Xianxia, it should have been accomplished with ease. But they still hadn't seen that deity until now. However, they weren't worried because it was truly quite difficult to kill a deity. Yet now Xianxia was here, but there had been no news from that deity. All of them had thought of a certain possibility, so their faces had instantly turned pale. Meanwhile, the gray-robed old man spoke in a low voice. Don't scare yourselves. Xianxia is an extraordinary genius, but it's impossible for him to kill a deity. Someone definitely helped him. All of them fell silent. They would have believed the gray-robed old man if he said all of that a while ago. Yet now, Xianxia had instantly annihilated 3 semi-deities just now. 3 semi-deities in an instant. Such strength was something only a true deity possessed. In other words, Xianxia's strength was already comparable to a deity. A few moments of silence ensued, and then a white-robed old man spoke solemnly. Immediately notice Elder Tsong's group. That's not advisable, right? Meanwhile, one of the old men said, the battle on Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region is at its peak. It won't take long for it to be completely conquered. At that time, our territory will double at the very least. If we retreat now, we might be unable to gain any new territories once Celestial Demon Stellar Region conquers Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region. All of them fell silent. Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region was about to fall, and if nothing unexpected happened, it would definitely be crushed. If they retreated now, it would be equivalent to giving everything away to Celestial Demon Stellar region. That would harm all their interests, and it would be a huge loss for all of them. Meanwhile, one of the old men spoke in a low voice. We have 4 deities there, so we can bring one back. A deity and us should be sufficient to deal with Xianxia. All of them hurriedly nodded because it was a good solution. An old man immediately withdrew a violet transmission talisman and crushed it, and it didn't take long for the space in front of them to tremble before returning to normal a few breaths of time later. The gray-robed old man spoke solemnly. From this moment onward, we have to be absolutely careful and be vigilant at all times. Moreover, we can't split up. Once we split up and give him an opportunity, then we... Suddenly, the space around 30 before them rippled, and then a beam of sword energy swept out from there. It was so swift that they hadn't even been able to react before one of the old men stiffened on the spot. It didn't take long for the old man's figure to become ethereal and vanish on the spot. All of them were horrified. This time, their reaction wasn't slow, and they immediately slapped their palms at the expansive space where the sword energy had come from. Bang! 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 In an instant, that expanse of space was obliterated. A short while later, it was completely repaired, but there was no sign of Xianxia. All of them had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces. Xianxia had killed another semi-deity in front of them, yet they hadn't even been able to catch sight of his shadow. That was absolutely terrifying. Actually, once they found out that it was Xianxia, the fear they experienced had reduced quite a bit, because so long as Xianxia dared to show himself, they would definitely dare to fight him. After all, Xianxia was just an emperor and not a deity. If they were terrified by an emperor to the point of being afraid to fight, then it would be an absolute humiliation for them, and they wouldn't be able to let themselves do that. Yet now, Xianxia refused to show himself and fight them, and he was just launching surprise attacks. The most terrifying part was that Xianxia's ability to conceal himself was too formidable. He was completely undetectable and killed with a single strike. Was he even a sword cultivator? No. He was like an assassin. A long while of silence ensued, and then the gray-robed old man spoke solemnly. Ask Elder Tsang to send someone back as soon as possible. From this moment onwards, we'll join forces to fortify the space in an area of 300 around us, and then we wait for our reinforcements to arrive. As soon as he finished speaking, the 9 of them nodded and started fortifying the space around them. It didn't take long for the space around them to be strong like a fort. Now, it was impossible for anyone to enter this expanse of fortified space without them noticing. Moreover, once someone entered by force, they would sense it at the first possible moment. Time passed slowly, yet there was no movement in the surroundings. However, all 9 of them didn't dare act carelessly at all. Their minds were tense, and their eyes were filled with vigilance. Around 15 minutes later, ah! Shrill cries suddenly started resounding in the ruins down below. All 9 of them were shocked. Meanwhile, a middle-aged man arrived before them and spoke in a trembling voice. Someone is assassinating our voiders. The voiders! Their expressions instantly turned gloomy when they heard this. The voiders were the middle-level force of a power, and they absolutely couldn't be overlooked. After all, once a war occurred, it was impossible for only deities to fight. Moreover, voiders could pose a threat to semi-deities. Because the gap between voiders and semi-deities wasn't that huge, they hadn't expected Xianxia to actually act against the voiders. Even they couldn't resist him, let alone those voiders. One of the old men spoke in a low voice. What do we do now? Head down there. The gray-robed old man spoke in a low voice. If we don't, he'll annihilate all the voiders. Moreover, it'll bitterly disappoint all our subordinates. So we must head down there. They nodded, and then she shot towards the ruins of Sky River City. However, Xianxia was gone when they arrived there, and only corpses were left behind. There were voiders and emperors amongst the corpses, but most were voiders. One of the old men spoke in a low voice. He's too swift, and his ability to conceal his aura is too formidable. Ah! Suddenly, a shrill cry resounded from 3 kilometers away, Their expressions changed, and then immediately shot over to the source of the shrill cry. At this moment, a corpse was lying there. The corpse of a voider. Meanwhile, another shrill cry resounded from over 5 kilometers away. They were about to rush over when the gray-robed old man suddenly said, "There's no need to go there. It's too late. Notify all the voiders and emperors to converge with us. We must form a joint defense." They nodded, and then they hurriedly notified the emperors and voiders in the city. It didn't take long for all of them to converge with the gray-robed old man's group. At this moment, there were 9 semi-deities, 26 voiders that were made up of true and ordinary voiders, and over 300 emperors. They were all the experts of Sky River City. The gray-robed old man ordered in a low voice, "Fortify the space around us." As soon as he finished speaking, all of them hurriedly did as he said. It didn't take long for the space around them to be solid as dark steel, but they still didn't dare relax and were fully vigilant. One of the old men by the gray-robed old man's side spoke in a low voice. "Now what?" "Wait," the gray-robed old man said. "Wait for a deity from our side to arrive." All of them nodded. Xianxia was too terrifying, and only a deity could deal with Xianxia. If they were to leave this place, then not to mention killing Xianxia, they might not even be able to see him before they lost their lives. They had to wait until a deity arrived. Suddenly, someone cried out involuntarily with astonishment, "Look there!" They looked over towards the distance, and they saw a man in green clothes walking slowly towards them with a sword in his grasp. Xianxia. Their expressions instantly changed. Xianxia couldn't be said to be walking very quickly, but every single step he took seemed like it stomped down on their hearts, causing them to feel suffocated. It didn't take long for Xianxia to grow closer and closer to them. It didn't take long for Xianxia to stop, and then he placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. The expressions of everyone here changed drastically at the sight of this. Sky River City had been destroyed by just 2 swings of Xiangxia's sword, and he was about to draw his sword again. So, how could they not be afraid? How could they not be terrified? Suddenly, the gray-robed old man shouted coldly, "Stay calm!" His voice was like a thunderclap that shook their eardrums to the point sharp pain came from them. However, they did calm down quite a bit because of it. The gray-robed old man gazed at Xianxia and spoke solemnly, "You're Xianxia, right?" Xianxia didn't speak. He started to walk towards the gray-robed old man's group. At the same time, a strand of terrifying sword intent slammed down upon them. The gray-robed old man was horrified and hurriedly said, "Xianxia, the deities of my Sky River stellar region are on the way here. You might be able to live if you leave right now. Otherwise, it'll soon be too late for you to leave." "Deities?" Xianxia stopped, and then his sword intent surged back into him. The gray-robed old man heaved a sigh of relief. He knew that Xianxia was afraid of deities, and he hurriedly said, "Of course, the deities of my Sky River stellar region are rushing back as we speak. Based on their speed, it'll take 2 hours at most for them to arrive. You can preserve your life if you leave right now. Otherwise, you'll die a graveless death once they arrive." Xianxia spoke coldly. "Are you trying to scare me?" "Scare you?" The gray-robed old man spoke coldly. "Xianxia, if you don't believe me, then attack. We'll keep you here even if all of us have to die here today, and you'll die a graveless death once the experts of our alliance arrive." Xianxia remained silent. Meanwhile, the gray-robed old man continued, "Xianxia, I admit that your strength is heaven-defying indeed, but can you fight a deity? Even if you can fight one, can you fight 4? Can you resist the joint forces of 4 deities? If you don't want to die, then it's best if you leave right now." If he had a choice, he would hope that Xianxia stayed, because once the deity arrived, then Xianxia would definitely die. However, he didn't dare to make Xianxia stay, because Xianxia was too terrifying. If he was allowed to continue attacking them, then countless here would die before the deity could even get there. So he had no choice but to scare Xianxia away. Xianxia seemed to have been scared by him. Xianxia remained silent on the spot for over a dozen breaths of time, and then he transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the sky. all of them heaved sighs of relief at the sight of this. The gray-robed old man heaved a sigh of relief as well. Not to mention those semi-deities who'd lost their lives earlier. Even he couldn't resist that attack of Xianxia's. Now that Xianxia had left, his tense nerves had finally relaxed. He'd been constantly afraid that Xianxia would draw his sword, so he'd been extremely tense just now. Fortunately, he'd succeeded at scaring Xianxia away. The others here exchanged glances, and then they couldn't help but smile. It was a smile from surviving calamity. Because they thought Xianxia had been scared away, they dispersed their energy, which was fortifying the space around them, causing it to return to normal. Something is off. Suddenly, the gray-robed old man frowned. Xianxia is absolutely not that cowardly. He wouldn't just be scared away because of a few words. The old man seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes opened wide as he quickly shouted, "Xianxia hasn't left. Quickly fortify the space around us." Suddenly, a sword howl interrupted the old man, and then a beam of sword energy flashed out from a distant point in space and entered their group. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then a semi-deity was obliterated. At the same time, the powerful aftershock of the collision blasted all the others around 10 kilometers away. Moreover, some emperors were even killed by the impact. Xianxia hadn't left. All of them were horrified. Meanwhile, the gray-robed old man's anxious voice resounded, "Stay calm. Stay calm and join forces." Meanwhile, another beam of sword energy emerged from a point in space, and then another semi-deity vanished on the spot. This time, all of them weren't able to calm down no matter what. They started fleeing madly in all directions, and this even included some voiders. Xianxia had killed semi-deities in an instant. Xianxia had instantly killed 2 semi-deities right in front of their eyes. Just thinking about it caused a chill to run down their spines. At this moment, they just wanted to run as far away as they could and avoid that god of death. It didn't take long for only 7 semi-deities and some voiders to remain here. As for the emperors, they'd fled. At this moment, Xianxia had vanished as well, and it was like he'd never even made an appearance here. The 7 semi-deities had horrifyingly gloomy expressions on their faces. They hadn't expected Xianxia to come back and even kill 2 semi-deities in an instant. That attack was too strong, and it was so strong that even semi-deities couldn't resist it. The gray-robed old man spoke solemnly. "How long will it take for our reinforcements to arrive?" A short moment of silence ensued before an old man said, "An hour at most." The gray-robed old man frowned. "That long?" The old man who spoke earlier shook his head and said, "Clouds of Heaven stellar region is too far away from both our stellar region and stellar city. If we have the dimensional teleportation flags, then it would take around 10 minutes at most for them to get back here. However, it seems like it was Xianxia who took them as well." Xianxia. The gray-robed old man's eyes narrowed slightly. "He's an extraordinary genius. If he's allowed to grow, then our stellar region is finished." The others nodded when they heard him. Xianxia's natural talent was too terrifying. If he was allowed to continue growing, then crushing the Alliance of Guardians would probably just take a few swings of his sword in the future. After all, Xianxia was only an emperor right now, but he could kill semi-deities. Moreover, based on the heaven-defying strength he possessed, he was probably capable of fighting deities. Once he attained the Voider realm, even deities may not dare to fight him head-on. Meanwhile, one of the old men asked, "What do we do now?" "Wait." The gray-robed old man closed his eyes slowly. "We can do nothing but wait. If Xianxia chose to fight them head-on, then they would actually not fear him. At the very least, they would dare to risk their lives and fight him. However, the problem was that he refused to fight them directly. He was like a ghost that hid within space, and then frequently appeared to swing his sword a few times before immediately leaving. The most terrifying part was that no one here could withstand that attack of his. So, they could only wait until their reinforcements arrived. Meanwhile, Xianxia was hiding underground. The 2 heaven wrens he just executed and the 2 more he'd previously executed had completely exhausted his profound energy. However, all of that wasn't a huge problem for him right now, because there was no one pursuing him, and it only took a few hours for him to recover both his physical strength and profound energy. In the primordial pagoda, Xianxia sat cross-legged while divine crystals surrounded him. The divine crystals were burning, and countless strands of spirit energy emerged from them and surged into him. Actually, Xianxia liked fighting and running like this. However, he'd always been on the defensive in the past. So, he could only go head-on against his enemies and couldn't flee. Yet now, he was attacking, so the decision to attack was in his hands. Since he had the sword domain, blink, and the laws of space, he merely had to flee or hide himself, and then even deities wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Of course, so long as he showed himself, then the strength and reaction of deities would be sufficient to instantly force him out of hiding. So, he didn't dare act carelessly when facing deities. Actually, that deity he'd killed the other day couldn't really be considered as something he'd accomplished. He'd utilized the sword god's seal, stellar energy, and the advantage he had because the old man was close to him and had underestimated him. That was why he'd been able to land a strike on the old man. But even then, he still hadn't been able to instantly kill the old man. So, it clearly showed how strong deities were. If a true deity didn't act carelessly, underestimate him, or go head-on against his heavenrend, then he would be helpless against the deity. His heavenrend had extraordinary explosive strength, and it was extremely swift too. However, deities were even faster so they could dodge it. But deities were usually proud. It would be different if they faced cultivators at the same realm of cultivation. However, if they were facing an emperor, then many wouldn't choose to dodge because it was a humiliation. For example, Jiansu could have dodged Xianxia's heavenrend, but he hadn't and had chosen to go head-on against it. Jiansu was strong, so he'd been able to forcefully withstand it. That deity Xianxia encountered in the radiant dimension had chosen to do the same, but he hadn't been able to withstand it. If one's strength was lacking, then don't make a show of strength. 2 days later, Xianxia left the primordial pagoda. Xianxia immediately left the ground and snuck towards the ruins of Skyriver River. He naturally didn't intend to stop. He wanted to make blood flow into rivers. It didn't take long for Xianxia to arrive where the gray-robed old man and the others had been, but there was no one there. Xianxia frowned. Meanwhile, the space around him suddenly started to tremble violently. An ambush! Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew that he'd been discovered, and only a deity could accomplish that. You really did choose to come back again. Suddenly, a voice resounded, and then a violet-robed old man walked out of space from afar. The gray-robed old man's group were behind the violet-robed old man. A deity! The violet-robed old man waved his right hand, and then the surrounding space instantly calmed down. If you didn't return, then it would really be difficult for me to locate you with your ability in concealment. Unfortunately, you chose to return. I've done something to the space here, so as soon as you returned, I immediately... The violet-robed old man's voice stopped abruptly because Xianxia had suddenly transformed into a ray of light that shot towards him. Xianxia was extremely swift. Coupled with the fact that he'd launched the first attack, he'd been able to instantly arrive above the violet-robed old man. A wisp of ferocity flashed through his eyes while the sword god's seal emanated a ray of dazzling light on his forehead. His sword intent instantly grew numerous times stronger before he swiftly drew his sword and swung it. Xianxia didn't stop after he drew his sword and swung it once, and he swiftly sheathed his sword before drawing it and swinging it once more. Because he'd completed these attacks extremely quickly, the two heavenrends he'd executed had overlapped together. Two heavenrends overlapped over each other. Two heavenrends overlapped over each other. It was two heavenrends that were enhanced by the sword god's seal. Actually, Xianxia's first thought when he saw the deity wasn't to flee. It was to kill the deity. What was his objective? It was to reduce the pressure on Lady's shoulders. If Skyriver Stellar Region didn't bring back all its deities from Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region, then the pressure Lady experienced wouldn't be alleviated. So he couldn't flee, because fleeing would only waste time. He had to kill the deity before him and make them realize how terrifying he was. He wanted Sky River Stellar Region and Celestial Demon Stellar Region to understand that a single deity couldn't stop him. If they wanted to kill him, they would have to bring even more deities back from Clouds of Heaven Stellar Region. For the sake of giving that deity no chance to survive, Xianxia had immediately activated the Sword God Seal and overlapped 2 Heaven Wrens. How terrifying were 2 true Heaven Wrens when they were overlapped together. At the instant the sword howl resounded, the space in a huge area around him was instantly shattered. At the same time, the ruins of Sky River City were blasted into bits. However, those bits were still breaking down. In an instant, they were completely obliterated. It was like Sky River City had never been there. A wisp of disdain had flashed through the old man's eyes when he saw Xianxia attack. Was a true deity someone an ant at the Emperor realm could go against? However, his countenance had changed drastically when Xianxia swung his sword. His countenance had turned ghastly pale while shock, terror, and a trace of disbelief filled his eyes. That's an emperor? An emperor can execute such a terrifying attack? Even though he was horrified, his strong desire to live had made the old man execute his stronger attack. At this instant, a terrifying aura that was accompanied by a circle of violet light surged out from the old man and swept towards Xianxia. Bang! A huge explosion resounded through the surroundings, and then the space around them, which had just been repaired by the laws of the Heaven Tao, collapsed once more. Moreover, it collapsed at an alarming rate. In an instant, the space in a massive area around them had collapsed, and all the experts of Sky River City who hadn't been able to retreat in time were swallowed up by the black hole created there. Of course, that didn't include the Voiders and some comparatively stronger emperors. However, the rest were swallowed up if they hadn't been able to get away from Sky River City in time. In just that instant, Sky River City had lost countless experts. A few breaths of time passed before the space there gradually recovered. At this moment, Xianxia was over 1 kilometer away, and the violet-robed old man was still there. The gray-robed old man's group was behind the violet-robed old man. At this moment, blood was seeping out from the corner of their mouths. Because they hadn't been able to dodge in time, the aftershock from the collision had struck them, and it struck them over 5 kilometers back and inflicted a certain amount of damage to them. Of course, they didn't care about their injuries right now, they cared about the violet-robed old man. The gray-robed and the others gazed at the violet-robed old man. The old man stared forward blankly in silence, and a few breaths of time passed before he looked up at Xianxia. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he said, "How could this be possible? How could you execute such a formidable attack? That isn't something an emperor should be capable of. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense." As he spoke, the violet-robed old man's body started to become ethereal. The gray-robed old man and the others instantly turned ghastly pale at the sight of this. At this moment, their bodies couldn't help but tremble. It didn't take long for the violet-robed old man's figure to disperse completely. The gray-robed old man and the others took over a dozen steps back while horror filled their eyes. A deity had been killed in an instant. Xianxia had killed a deity in an instant. Meanwhile, Xianxia suddenly glanced at them. Their expressions instantly changed drastically at the sight of this, and they didn't hesitate to retreat over 3 kilometers back. Xianxia was at a loss for words. They gazed at Xianxia with extreme vigilance on their faces while their profound energy surged madly. They weren't prepared to fight. They were prepared to flee. They would immediately flee if Xianxia showed the slightest intent to attack. Fight? They would have dared to fight Xianxia a while ago. Yet now, once they watched Xianxia kill a deity in an instant, they didn't have the courage to fight him anymore. Xianxia could even instantly kill a deity. Xianxia didn't attack. He just glanced coldly at them, and then he turned around and walked off. No one knew if he did it on purpose, but Xianxia walked extremely slowly. However, not one of them dared to chase after him. Moreover, they desperately wished for Xianxia to walk faster. Around 15 minutes later, Xianxia had vanished from their fields of vision, and then they immediately heaved sighs of relief. Meanwhile, the gray-robed old man spoke solemnly. "Immediately notify Elder Tsong and all the others to return at once. All of them." One of the old men frowned. "If we do that, The gray-robed old man glanced coldly at the old man who'd just spoken. "I'm leaving the Alliance right now if they don't return." Another old man stepped forward and stated, "Me too." It didn't take long for all of them to make their stands clear, and all of them were of the same mind as the gray-robed old man. What a joke! Yang Yi was here. If those deities didn't return, then how would they fight him? They couldn't. They could only wait for death to arrive. Only deities could deal with Yang Yi. No, it had to be at least 2 deities. The old man who spoke just now laughed bitterly, and then he nodded. Actually, even he understood that the deities had to rush back. Otherwise, all of them would be annihilated here. Once he received the agreement of everyone here, the old man sent the voice transmission. Yang Yi hadn't walked off slowly on purpose. It was actually because even walking had been a problem for him. After he left their fields of vision, Yang Yi immediately found a concealed place and entered the primordial pagoda. Yang Yi didn't enter the 3rd level because he didn't want to worry Xianxia. As soon as he entered the world on the 1st level, Yang Ye's figure crashed to the ground, and his entire body started twitching incessantly. Backlash. It was backlash from exhausting himself beyond his limits. Actually, Yang Yi had thought about overlapping the true form of Heavenrend from a very long time ago. Because ordinary Heavenrends could be overlapped, then the true form of it could naturally be overlapped as well. However, he didn't have a chance to try it, because semi-deities could be killed with a single swing of Heavenrend. So he could only test it on a deity. It was the first time he'd overlapped the true form of Heavenrend. What did that mean? It meant that he'd drawn his sword twice in practically the exact same moment. It had an extremely high requirement in terms of physical strength. Because executing Heavenrend just once exhausted a large amount of physical strength, while executing it twice in succession didn't give the body a chance to rest. So, the exhaustion was even more terrifying. When he drew his sword for the 2nd time, Yang Yi hadn't just exhausted all the profound energy within him and the Worldmen's Stone. He'd even exhausted all his physical strength. Overlapping 2 Heavenrends had increased the strength of his technique by over 5 times. However, its consumption had multiplied as well. Even his epic realm body wasn't really able to support that consumption. Fortunately, while it did hurt, his mind was still clear, and it wasn't as terrifying as suffering backlash from his sword intent. The backlash from his sword intent was too terrifying, and he was quite afraid of it. Yang Yi moved his finger slightly, and it didn't take long for countless divine crystals to appear around him as he laid there on the ground. Once the divine crystals emanated spirit energy, it was instantly absorbed by his body. At this moment, his body was truly starving. Now that spirit energy was surging into him, primordial violet energy appeared within him, and it didn't take long for the primordial violet energy to swiftly repair his body. Actually, Yang Yi noticed that if he could constantly recover after over-exhausting his body, then it had a few benefits. The most obvious benefit was getting used to it and getting used to the backlash. If it were any other person, that person's mind would definitely collapse from the backlash, but in his opinion, it was just slightly painful. In other words, his ability to endure pain had improved tremendously. Another benefit was that he felt his body was growing stronger incessantly. Yes, every time he exhausted it beyond its limits, he felt that his body seemed to grow slightly stronger. Of course, it was mainly because his recovery could keep up. If his recovery couldn't keep up, then he wouldn't grow stronger, he would be crippled instead. All of this was thanks to the primordial violet energy. The primordial violet energy's recuperative ability was truly heaven-defying. It was exactly because he had primordial violet energy that he dared to exhaust his strength beyond its limits and fight like such a madman. Because so long as he was still breathing, the primordial violet energy could nurse him back to health. After his body recovered to normal, Yang Yi entered the 3rd level of the pagoda. Xianxia was cultivating. He didn't disturb her, and he just sat down cross-legged and started absorbing spirit energy from divine crystals once more. 2 days later, Yang Yi opened his eyes slowly. At this moment, he'd recovered completely. His body was fine, and his profound energy had been refilled. Yang Yi glanced at Xianxia. At this moment, her aura was gradually growing stronger, and she showed signs of advancing. However, she may not be able to succeed soon because she just advanced into the quasi-emperor realm. Yang Ye's gaze lingered on her for a long time, and then he left the primordial pagoda. Once he left the primordial pagoda, the sword precursor appeared in Yang Ye's grasp. At the same time, the ancient sheath appeared in his left grasp. Yang Yi sheathed it, and then he held the ancient sheath as he started walking towards where Sky River City once stood. Presently, he intended to fight and run, recover and attack again, and then run once more. He intended to cripple Sky River Stellar region on his own.